We see people joining in. Probably give it a minute. Okay, I think we can get started. Uh, Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar on the follow-up clarification, energy savings from network lighting controls with and without LLLC. Next slide, please. I'm Bhagwat Mohan. I'm the Technical Operations Manager at the DLC for the Network Lighting Controls program. I manage the day-to-day operations of the qualified products list. I work closely with manufacturers to ensure that the systems that get listed are in compliance with the technical requirements, and I oversee the application processing. And I provide technical input on the policy development to ensure that the specifications are in alignment with the evolving market needs. Prior to DLC, I come from a utility background. I work for a leading utility company in Massachusetts. I hold a Master of Science degree in Energy Systems Engineering from Northeastern University, Boston. Joining me today are two lighting experts, Yao Jung Wen and Chris Walgamot. Let me take a minute to introduce both of them. Yao is an engineering fellow at Energy Solutions. He's a certified lighting professional and holds a PhD in engineering from UC Berkeley, where he received his doctoral training in energy efficient lighting control applications using wireless mesh network technologies. He's the lead engineer in supporting the midstream lighting energy efficiency programs implemented by Energy Solutions across the nation. He also provides support for various lighting-related policy development and advocacy efforts, including the California Title 24 Building Energy Code. He was the lead technical consultant for the 20 NEEA DLC study on the energy savings from NLCs with and without LLLC, which is what this memo is based on. For over 25 years, Chris Walgamot has worked in the utility business in the Pacific Northwest as a program manager, energy efficiency engineer, and product manager. Mr. Walgamot is recognized as a subject matter expert for LLLC. He works extensively with lighting manufacturers on where the future of lighting and controls are headed. His work in the utility business has allowed him to gain vast knowledge on how incentive programs are developed and run. As the senior product manager for commercial residential lighting and commercial efficient rooftop units, Chris works with manufacturers on increasing the efficiency of lighting, lighting controls, and natural gas rooftop units. Chris leads all emerging tech research on lighting products to support transformation of the commercial and residential lighting markets. He is the subject matter expert for the natural gas efficient rooftop unit program and high performance HVAC program, working with industry to transform the commercial HVAC market. So here's the agenda for today. Chris will provide an introduction, and later he'll also talk about a NEEA study that's often compared with this report, followed by Yao, who will present the main clarification points of this memo that really is the crux of this report. And I will wrap it up with some key takeaways for our DLC members and efficiency programs, how we intend for them to use this and incorporate it in their programs. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A. Some housekeeping items. We have a good participation today, so all the attendees will be on mute through the duration of the webinar. We do encourage you to ask questions using the question feature that you'll see on the top right. You'll see a small questions icon. Use that to submit your questions. And if you face any technical issues, use the chat feature right next to it to let us know. we'll be monitoring both those windows closely. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted in the DLC website. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bhagwat. Yeah, so let's jump right in. So what are we going to talk about? So back in 2020, NEEA and DLC released a report on the energy savings of network lighting controls with and without LLC. And this slide kind of says, the highlights of what that report was, right? So a lot of energy savings, 49% overall, 63% with LLC, 35% average without LLC, so your standard NLCs. Kind of gives you a rundown there. We had a good amount of building types, almost 200 buildings, and it was almost equally split between with and without LLC. 12 different manufacturers and 7 different building types, and across the United States. So a really good graph of that. Once it was released, we saw TRMs and efficiency programs point to it and a lot. So this kind of gives you an idea. There was 20 states and provinces across Canada and the U.S. that has used this report in some form for either a TRM or an efficiency program. So because of that, we started to see some interpretations of the report that were probably not the way that it was intended, and we wanted just to make sure that we had the ability to clarify some of the things that people were using or pointing to, or kind of make sure that we got it right so that you guys got it right when you're looking at it. So that's what we've done. Yao went through and did a research on it and has created this update memo that is now released. I think it was released earlier, and this is sort of going through it. So yeah. But I think the key to this is we didn't go out and do new research. This is no new information. It's all still the same data from the original report. We're just clarifying how it's viewed. There's one more. Here's the methodology. So yeah, just kind of how we did it. We identified where the confusions were and the issues through interviewing stakeholders, and those are some of the stakeholders that we talked to there on the side. And then we talked to different people inside that, and trying to see how that was being used, how they were looking at it, and where if they had confusions we went through and sort of defined all that, and then we analyzed that feedback and made the clarifications in the memo. So now we know what we're doing, and I'm going to turn it over to Yao to sort of tell you what the answers were to that and tell you kind of define the memo.
All right, thanks, Chris. So here we go. Here are the key clarification points documented in the memo. They include the definition of luminaire level lighting controls, or LLLC, the effect of NLC system programming and optimization on control savings factors, or CSFs. And by the way, we will be using CSF as a shorthand for control savings factor for the rest of the presentation. And this CSF, control savings factors, were also equivalent to basically NLC savings. And how to replicate the reported CSFs using a smaller set of NLC installations, possibly incentivized through specific EE programs. How to interpret the CSFs in the report that are broken down by control strategies and building types. Last but not the least, the relationship between this 2020 savings potential report and other related studies. So coming up, we will be using a question and answer style of presentation to discuss each of these points. So the first challenge that we've heard was what types of LLLC are the control savings factors applicable to? Now, luminaire level lighting controls can mean different characteristics and capabilities of an NLC system, depending on who you talk to. And at this point, the formal definition of LLLCs is almost sort of a philosophical argument now. But for this particular study, we used the definition as specified in the DLC and NLC QPL, technical requirements, which is the capability to have a networked occupancy sensor and ambient light sensor installed for each luminaire or kit and directly integrated or embedded into the form factor during the luminaire or kit manufacturing process. And I'm not going to read through the entire definition, and you can find this in the DLC and NLC technical requirements on DLC's website. So accordingly, we only tagged the data sets to be from an NLC with LLLC if the system was listed on the QPL to have the LLLC capability. In other words, the 98 data sets for NLCs with LLLC out of the total of 194 all had identified LLLC as a capability on the DLC and NLC QPL. And therefore, the overall average CSFs are most applicable to systems meeting DLC's criteria for the LLLC capability. Now, the CSFs, as we will see, broken down by control strategies, may apply to other types of integrated sensors or controls, which we will discuss later in this presentation. Now, the next question, the next question is, to what extent must the NLC systems be programmed and commissioned so that a prescriptive energy efficiency program can confidently apply the CSFs and claim the associated savings? Now, the CSFs documented in the 2020 report represents the savings average across NLCs with various degrees of programming. So when we collected the NLC energy data for the original study, we did not specify the level of programming or commissioning, nor did we apply any related criteria on system programming or commissioning to filter for the data sets. So all NLC systems included in the study were programmed to be functioning, which we were sure. And we had no insights into every individual system as to which control strategies were activated or enabled, or how the control parameters were set, and whether or not the control parameters were optimized for energy savings, etc., etc. So all this is to say that the control savings factors documented in the report do not represent the maximum achievable savings potential. They represent the average savings potential across a portfolio of NLC systems with different degrees of programming. And we actually feel the diverse degree of system programming and commissioning in the data sets is likely to be the most representative of how the NLCs incentivized through prescriptive energy efficiency programs would be actually programmed and commissioned. Okay, and to reinforce the argument and illustrate the point, let's look at the energy savings for each of the 194 systems included in the 2020 study. In this chart, each skinny bar represents the savings or control factors of an NLC system. A green bar indicates that it is the savings from an NLC system with LLLC, and a gray bar indicates an NLC system without LLLC. As we can see, regardless of the LLLC capability, the systems produced different savings or different control factors, which suggests that many of these systems were functioning, but were not optimally programmed to save maximum amount of energy. And this gets to our point that these control savings factors, 0.63 for systems with LLLC, 0.35 for systems without LLLC, and 0.49 average should represent really the average savings potential across all these systems. Now, EE programs may attempt to verify energy savings by monitoring a small sample of NLC projects incentivized through the program as part of the evaluation process or effort. And the question is, why would the monitored savings be significantly different from the CSFs documented in this report? This is because the CSFs were derived from a meaningfully large and diverse data set. As you can see in the chart here, represented in a different way, where in the previous chart, we color-coded it by whether it's with or without LLLC, and this one is color-coded by different building types. But the point is, there were 194 NLC energy data sets, and with about 50-50 split between NLCs with and without LLCs, and across 8 different building types. And this is not something that can be easily replicated through a small sample data sets. Any extreme cases will significantly bias the results when the sample pool is very small. So to further illustrate this point, we performed a simple exercise where each time we randomly sampled 5 out of the 194 data sets included in the original study. And we did this 15 times. And each green bar in the chart, as you see here, represents the average CSF calculated from the randomly sampled 5 NLC data sets. And as you can see, many of the sampled results were nowhere near the 49% average CSF from the complete 194 data sets. So that's sort of how we're trying to prove the point where it's not really feasible or appropriate trying to recreate this 49 or 63% savings potential or control savings factors through a very small sample data set. Now, the next one, and the next question we frequently encounter is, why aren't the CSFs broken down by control strategies in the report adding up to the overall average CSFs? Now, I know this question may not be immediately obvious to many of you right now, but hopefully will become clear in the next few slides. Recall that the original report provided CSFs broken down into savings from high-end trim and the so-called other control strategies. We were able to break out high-end trim savings because of the characteristics of the data sets, but it wasn't possible to more granularly break out the savings for each control strategies. Therefore, the savings by other control strategies essentially represents any savings that did not come from high-end trim, okay? But then we also know that the primary energy savings drivers for NLC are high-end trim, occupancy sensing, and daylight harvesting. So essentially the other control strategies generally would just represent the combined savings from occupancy sensing and daylight harvesting. And the graphic here shows conceptually what the high-end trim and other control strategy savings look like in relation to the actual NLC energy usage. So the savings from high-end trim are simply the area between the rated maximum luminaire power and the highest measured power in the blue diagonal stripe pattern here. And the savings from other control strategies are the area between the highest measured power and the actual NLC power consumption profile as indicated in the original diagonal stripe pattern here. Now, the question is, how come the high-end trim savings and other control strategy savings do not add up to the overall average savings? So take, for example, the first row in the table for NLCs with LLLC. The savings factor for high-end trim, which is 0.37, and the savings factor for other control strategies, 0.41, presented in this table, they actually add up to 0.78, right? Not 0.63. So why? We will explain why later, but at a high level, this is because the broken down savings were derived to represent the two types of savings independent of each other. And this way, they can be applied separately by programs to offer different control measures. For example, the high-end trim CSFs may be applied to luminaires that have embedded control nodes, but without any integral sensors. Another example may be that the other control strategy CSFs, which we have discussed to primarily represent the combined savings from occupancy sensing and daylight harvesting, may be applied to luminaires with integral arc sensor and daylight sensor, but with no or limited networking capability for high-end trim. And we have seen this commonly referred to by programs as dual sensor, multifunction sensor, combo sensor, etc., etc. So to illustrate this point, let's take a look at two hypothetical cases. The lights in the building A on the left have a much higher rated maximum power than those in building B on the right. However, in this case, the lights in both buildings are trimmed down to the same maximum power, right? In other words, high-end trim generated more savings in building A than in building B. Now, the savings from other control strategies are identical in both buildings if we are talking in absolute terms, in terms of absolute amount kWh savings, right? As you can obviously see here. However, percentage-wise, when calculated based on rated maximum power, other control strategies saved less energy in building A, saved less percentage of energy in building A than in building B. Well, simply because building A has a higher rated maximum power. Now, suppose there was no high-end trim implemented. Wouldn't we think that the other control strategies have the same savings potential, again, percentage-wise for both buildings? And they should look like this, right? And this is why the other control strategies, CSFs, are represented in a way regardless of whether high-end trim is in place or not in the previous table. And I wanted to note that in this memo, we have provided a more detailed example to walk through this concept mathematically. So if I've unfortunately lost you for the past few minutes explaining this concept, I'm sure you will get it by reviewing the example in the memo. So continue on, the report, the original report did provide another table in the later section that presents the other control strategy CSFs in both ways. Again, look at the first row for NLCs with LLLC. If other control strategies CSF is presented as a fraction of system rated maximum power, then it'll come up to 0.26. And this number, together with the 0.37 CSF for high-end trim, will now add up to 0.63 overall average savings. But I want to emphasize that this 0.26 CSF for other control strategies must be applied in conjunction with the 0.37 high-end trim CSF and cannot be applied independently without the context of the 0.37 high-end trim savings. And the mathematical example provided in the memo I mentioned in the previous slide also illustrates how you can actually go back and forth between these two different presentations of other control strategies. And I should also point out that this table in the original report contains a few typos which have been fixed and provided in the list of errata included in the memo. Okay, so that was probably the most math-heavy question. the rest will be more straightforward. So the next question is to clarify what do the CSFs represent when broken down by building types. So the original report provided a list of CSFs broken down into different building types, which we have seen utilized by several states or program savings guidelines or technical reference manuals. And what you are seeing here is actually an excerpts from the original report. And what we want to clarify here is that the CSFs for each building type should represent the savings for the entire building, including all the primary functional areas and all the supporting spaces. In other words, these CSFs do not represent savings potential for the primary functional areas only. And this is because the data sets used to derive these CSFs were from NLC systems that served the entire building and not only the primary functional areas within the building. So this is not to be confused with the common building energy modeling approach, where a building model is made up of different functional spaces, like the example of a light industrial manufacturing building model shown on the right here, where each functional space has its own schedule for lighting, occupancy, HVAC, etc., and the associated savings. So in short, the CSFs provided in this report, broken down by building types, are meant to be seen as savings potential for that building as a whole at the building level, and not be treated as functional area CSFs and be further synthesized into some other compound CSFs. Okay, so the next clarification is related to another NEEA report, and I will hand this back to Chris, who actually sponsored both reports. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Yao. Yeah, so we're going to just talk about another report that came out really close to the same time here, and kind of, I think there's some confusion on how to read it versus and looking at this as well. So next slide. So this report was done. It was called Luminaire Level Lighting Controls Replacement for versus Redesign, and there was a comparison study. And it was published really close, 15 days before this report. And it concluded there was comparable savings between LLC and NLCs. The one difference between this that I want to point out, and then you can see here where the savings numbers are and all that kind of stuff, is that I think in the next slide we'll talk a little bit, but it's like when we looked at the NLC, the point of this was utilities had products or programs where you either did one-for-one replacement or you did full redesign, and they had full redesign where you changed where the lights were, the layouts, the whole thing, and you changed the control system, so you optimized how that space, which is a really, really expensive way to do the lighting, and the utilities in the Northwest weren't seeing a lot of the uptake of the full redesign to get the most optimal, energy efficiency out of the space with the lighting. And the point of this was to prove that you could do one-for-one replacement with luminaire level lighting controls and get equal savings to a very expensive full redesign with network lighting controls. So next slide. And so, in the details of this particular thing, we looked at 4 different LLC systems that were one-for-one replacement and one comprehensive redesign solution using an NLC system that didn't have LLC. So, and like I said, the key takeaway for this, for us, when we looked at it was, yes, still the best thing to do is a full redesign where you optimize where the lighting is and do all that and optimize the controls. However, in a lot of retrofit projects, you could just go in and put LLC in where you put one-for-one replacement, don't move any of the fixtures, just use the lighting controls, and you're going to get equal savings out of the control side of this to what you had seen if you did a full redesign. Yeah, so this kind of, if you compared it true apples to apples, right? So we're seeing that, in the study that DLC and NEEA did, you had 63% average savings for LLCs, which is right in the middle of that where we said 50 to 74%, right? So that was the average that worked out well. The other was 35% for non-LLC network lighting controls. And in that other report, we showed a savings of 67% average with that for it, but that was with a comprehensive redesign, right? So that's the max of it, right? That's not the average. It's a single thing, single product project, right? But that's the maximum savings you can see, not the average savings. Yeah, so I think that they do complement each other. You just have to read them sort of and understand what the first one says. It's not that first one for where that came out. That's the comparison of one for one versus full redesign was really made to show that you could do a less expensive way to get the same kind of energy savings than doing a full redesign. And it wasn't saying that all network lighting control systems are going to provide the same savings as LLC. It's saying that if you really went in and did a full project and designed it specifically to save the most energy, you could get there with network lighting controls, but you aren't going to see it if you just did one for one, right? Type of thing. So, yeah. So I think that's a clarification on how to read those two together. So, and I think I'll turn it over to Bhagwat now.
How confident can the industry be with the control saving factors given the report recommending additional studies to further verify them? So this is based on real world data set, right? This was sort of a disclaimer that we added, but in no way means to discredit what findings we have in this report. But of course, additional savings with more data would definitely help us update the control savings potentials. So the NLC systems with LLLC that show the overall savings is through a diverse data set that pretty much had a 50-50 with and without LLLC. So these control savings factors that we have in this study are reliable and like mentioned earlier, it's been adopted by over 20 TRMs, and we hope that this memo would help more programs incorporate this into their studies. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as Yao and Chris mentioned earlier, we have clarified the key points that we see have caused some confusions and misinterpretations of the original findings. If you'd like more details, the memo is available in the website. You can download it at designlights.org. And as part of this effort, we also updated the executive summary of the original report to reflect these clarifications. That is also included in the memo. We had also issued an errata in this just to update the table 10 clerical errors in the table 10 of the original report. And this errata is also included in the memo. It is to be noted that these are only clerical errors and there are no changes in the original findings or the figures that we had published in the 2020 report. We look forward to seeing more prescriptive programs, both downstream and midstream, utilizing this study for offering more NLC incentives. Downstream, like, more clearer data-driven benchmark through these validated CSFs to promote more NLC installations. And on the end users, facility managers side, they can incorporate NLCs with more confidence in their buildings on the expected savings from NLC. For midstream, we would like to see more NLC offered for more incentives offered for the NLC technology, and distributors at this level of the supply chain should encourage their clients to go for NLC equipped luminaires and utilize the prescriptive rebates. And some key takeaways for our members and programs, that just to give a summary of the main points and how you can find this useful and incorporate this in your programs. The NLC savings vary based on system programming and optimization. Like we saw earlier, this is a diverse data set of 194 buildings. And there are some buildings which had savings like over 60 and 70%. And on the other end, there were also like 20, 30%. So this is real world data and the current state of affairs, right? So systems with better commissioning definitely yields higher savings. So utilities should promote better programming, better incentives for optimal programming while applying the CSFs of this report, so they can achieve higher savings and can also claim them. So this report, as part of this report, like some of the clarifications are feedbacks and concerns that we heard from TRM reviewers and developers. So we hope that this memo helps refine the TRM calculations. And it is important that programs align their incentive structures with the TRMs, because TRMs serve as a basis for determining the energy saving estimates for prescriptive programs. And using this clearer benchmarks, you have more confidence and credibility in the programs when you align with these TRM calculations. And you don't need to worry about underestimating or over claiming your energy savings. There's more confidence in the incentives that you offer through the prescriptive measures. Energy efficiency verification and data standardization. I'll speak to the second point first. So utilities should establish robust M&V methodologies, especially if you're offering bonus for optimal programming, and if you're going to use a specific CSF for that particular building type, as we have broken it down in the report, just to make sure that you're setting realistic expectations on the energy savings, so you can verify to make sure your estimated savings is closer to the actual outcome. And CSFs should be applied carefully to avoid bias in small sample evaluations. This is just as a gentle reminder and to reiterate that while you're incorporating the CSFs, keep in mind the scale of your portfolio. This is over 200 buildings. So if your program has like 15 projects, this average number could be skewed one way or the other. So just keep that in mind. The memo is available in the website, and the recording will also be posted shortly. It's available, as you can follow these red boxes. That's in the resources tab. And now we will move on to questions.
So I'll go to the first one. So this is from Steve Mesh. He asked, why does the TR use the word capability and not simply require the incorporation of sensors? That has created confusion among various utilities I've worked with since 2020.
I think this specifically refers to LLLC. So the nomenclature capability was introduced in the technical requirements since the inception of the NLC program in 2016. And we have maintained that over the years to be consistent with other control strategies. But I do agree, but there's more ambiguity in what an LLLCs as the technology itself got more popular, and the different definitions used in different regions. We are working with our stakeholders to standardize the definition, so to eliminate the confusion.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question comes from Michael Meyer. He says, in the CSF breakdown, Yao said that the primary savings were high-end trim, occupancy sensors, and daylight harvesting. What other saving measures / options were considered?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Michael. We actually have very limited, back then, in 2019, 18 to 19, when we were doing the study, we actually had a very limited option on considering all other savings measures and options, because like I pointed out before, we didn't have any insights into exactly what control strategies were activated in each of the systems. And I can also provide you some more details here. We actually developed ambitiously developed a spreadsheet, and for the data sets that we directly inquired from the owner or the building managers, we trying to have them answer, well, what control strategies are you using here? And the spreadsheet, the control strategies were based on the control capabilities listed on the NLC, DLC, NLC technical requirements, right? So we did have some of those information, but unfortunately not all of them, actually not for most of them, because the data were provided from different stakeholders, some from building owners, some from manufacturers, which we will have this kind of data, but many from utility programs and from other sources where we didn't have the data. So I guess to answer your question more directly is that, yeah, we considered a lot of different control savings measures, but we didn't have a way to really incorporate that to really say anything further or say anything more than to break out the high-end trim savings and all these other control strategy savings. And even with high-end trim savings, I should also clarify that is a derived savings. It is not a absolute savings. We have 100% confidence and with the support of the robust data that these savings 100% absolutely came from high-end trim savings, right? We had to derive that from the energy data set, and we developed the methodology to distill that high-end trim savings from the data set as best as possible, but it's certainly not 100% certainty that all this 100% of the savings actually came from high-end trim. Although we have a high degree of confidence that this methodology was robust, and then the high-end trim savings we derived should be representative enough for the purpose. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Yao. All right, so our next question comes from Thomas Wood. He says, why are the contributions to CSF for LLLC and non-LLLC so different? 0.17 to 0.37 is a huge jump when in theory they could be the same.
0.17 and 0.37, I guess that's referring to the high-end trim savings. And I don't actually have a good answer for you, because we don't actually know, like I just said, we don't actually know how each of the 194 systems were actually programmed or commissioned. So
I can jump in and say that I think there's some, we don't know for a fact, but the fact that with LLC you can go down to fixture level trimming makes it so that you can have bigger trims versus a whole, where most of the network lighting controls, you may not be able to do it by fixture. You could do it by zone or by section, so you may not do as much. Those are things that we've seen out there as not, again, not, we can't say that this report, we couldn't put that in this report because we couldn't see that in the data, but we've seen it anecdotally through projects that are out there, is that when we can go down to the fixture level for trimming, we see bigger trim happen at the fixture level than we do for general zones and that kind of thing.
Awesome, thank you guys. We have one more question, again from Steve Mesh. He had the same question about using the word capability in reference to network functionality.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So he asked earlier about why the word capability was used to simply require the incorporation of sensors.
Mhm.
Now he's asking what it would be for reference to networked functionality.
Yeah, networking also we call it as a capability true today. I don't really have a good answer to you for that, but I do hear that, as you said, there is some confusion that you see amongst the utilities. We will look into that to see how we
Oh,
can
he
eliminate
says
that confusion.
capability versus requirement. Why the capability versus requirement? Do you have an answer for that?
So we have required capabilities and reported capabilities in the technical requirements. So capability is used for the NLC control strategies.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that answered your question, Steve, but you have my email ID. Feel free to reach out to me. We can talk more on that.
Absolutely. All right, we have another question from Andrew Cardello. He says multiple manufacturers are currently working on releasing recessed downlights with integrated LLLC. Do you foresee any issues with utilities, including these in EE programs?
I can take a step at that, and I'm sure Chris, you have something to say. Well, depending on how you define including, right? I don't foresee. I'm actually I would be very much happy to see additional type of luminaires with advanced controls coming out. We've seen some of those already, but yeah, we can try to include that in EE programs. And what came into my mind is that then how do we derive savings for these newer type of luminaires with embedded controls, right? Because this study was done before this new product type came out. So I don't think I, I I don't know whether the control savings factors can apply just directly to this newer type of luminaires, right? And who knows, maybe this type of new luminaires actually have higher savings potential, but we just don't know. So that might be the first challenge there. And I think for utilities that really needs to drill down to be certain about energy savings, this would be the main challenge for including this newer type of luminaires in the EE program. And that's just my take. And then also downlights as a downlight by itself, right, with or even without any controls, has already been eliminated in many programs just because of the uh, 20, I don't remember the year, but the last general service lamp standards, right? Because a lot of baselines used in downlight savings calculation were incandescent lamps or halogen lamps, which have been outlawed, at least for now. and and I don't think that's really fair. My rent was always been for commercial and industrial usage. A lot of downlights were actually used in CFLs or even metal halides, right? Those are not outlawed for now, at least in most of the states. So the baseline is still there. But unfortunately, downlight has ceased to exist in many programs. And now that would potentially be another challenge here because, well, controls can be incentivized, but downlight cannot in many programs. Then can you just incentivize the control part, but not the luminaire part? I know it's possible, but it's just introduce a lot of complexity there.
I'll maybe ask, I think the first thing that pops into my mind is what do they mean by integrated LLC? Are they actually putting the sensor in the downlight? Because that, to me, I can, we've seen it, right? We've seen them where they put the little sensor sort of right on the side of the light. But more often than not, what we've seen with downlights is they separate the sensor from the downlight. Like even in we have LLC in our space, and we have downlights, and we put a sensor for every 2 fixtures for a downlight, right? So we put the sensor in between the 2 fixtures or before the 2 fixtures, and then another one. So, but the fixture itself is capable of everything, right? It's got in our case, a D4i driver, but it's, it's capable of the high-end trim. It's capable of the occupancy. It's capable of the daylighting, and it's all there. So that would be my first question: are they actually putting a sensor on every fixture, or are they doing something different, or is the fixture just capable of doing all the control strategies but not actually having the sensor on it? If it's got the sensor on it and it's capable of all that, I don't see why a utility program would have an issue with it, because you've set yourself up with a fixture that's going to have all that controls. Like Yao said, you may not be able to pay for the fixture itself, but the control side you should be just fine and be able to integrate it. But I would have questions to make sure that the fixture itself actually met what you were, not that manufacturers aren't truthful in their advertising, but I just want to know exactly what you're getting. If they say it's got an integrated LLC, I'd want to know what that means before I agreed to anything.
Andrew says thank you. All right, do we have any more questions?
You can probably give it a minute to see if
Yep,
anybody
of
has anything
course.
else.
Yes, of course. John says nice work.
Thanks, John. You might also reach out to us anytime at info@designlights.org. We'll be happy to answer any other questions, or if you have further clarifications needed. All right then. Thank you all for attending. I hope this session was helpful.